My God, it's been so many hours. I don't even know how to count. My name is Tinka. You probably know me from other PMO leader shows, and I've had the honor of having the opportunity to organize with a great team of volunteers this event. And here I am also involved in hosting a few sessions. Actually, this is the first for the Americas. And it's a very great pleasure to have here with us Martin Parlet, who will be talking about a very interesting subject. And because we're starting a bit later, I don't want to keep everybody. I don't want to keep Martin also from his time, but just a quick run through because this is the first session of the Americas, and we didn't have there wasn't a formal opening. Just for you to know, we have 6 more hours of really cool events. We also had 12 hours before presented by our regions in APAC and EMEA. Amazing speakers from all over the world, amazing volunteers who helped contribute to this event, and of course, amazing sponsors without whom we couldn't really make this event free. And we look forward for what's upcoming for Americas. There will be 3 panels. There will be 3 individual presentations. Nothing is overlapping, so not to worry. You won't miss anything. If you do, recording is available right away. All the other sessions that have finished, you probably saw that the recording is there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Session is going to. I will give the ball to Mark, and I will make myself invisible and come back when it's time to go over the questions. Oh, one more thing, the chat and the Q&A and anything else that you see on your right side, also the emotions button, just feel free to use them. We like knowing how everybody's feeling and what you have to say. So that would be it from me. Martin, you have the stage.
Hi, thank you, Tinka, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Apologies, I'm still recovering a little bit from some flu, but I hope you can hear me well. It's a pleasure to kick off the Americas region this morning as well, and to follow the speakers that have already been contributing from across the world. So thank you for joining me. And today, I'm really talking about delivering change from the context of Montserrat. And the lessons that I think we can learn from what is a very special environment and a very unique PMO setting. So delivering change in the shadow of a volcano, PMO lessons from a post-disaster paradise. And today I'm going to talk about the theory and the practice behind our PMO, as well as some of what we've been able to achieve to date. As well as some of those lessons that I think are applicable to PMO application around the world. So first of all, a little bit about me. I'm the head of the PMO and essentially the director for projects for the government of Montserrat in the Caribbean. And before that, I've had a number of roles across portfolio, program, and project leadership. Previously, I worked in the nuclear sector, looking at nuclear decommissioning, a very highly regulated industry, working for Sellafield Limited on a variety of very high-risk, high-hazard projects and programs. Before that, I've also worked on Barack Obama's presidential campaign in the US. And I mention that because that, to me, is really an Uber project, something which is extremely kind of narrow, focus-driven, a specific set of stakeholders, and very clear kind of quality and cost and timescale features of that campaign. I also speak around the world on project, program, and portfolio and PMO. I was named as one of CBI's 35 business leaders under 35. And I come at this from really a non-project lens. So I came into PMO more at the strategic end, and then have also worked throughout the whole life cycle of project and program as well. So that's a little bit about me. And you might have heard a little bit about Montserrat's PMO. In 2020, we were named as the PMO of the year by the Association for Project Management. And I picked out some of the just the key feedback that we had from the judging panel there, which was that we're a very new and small unit. We'd only been in existence for around 9 or 10 months at the time that we put in our application. But in that time, we had already shown lessons around innovation and how you map a PMO to very unique contexts in order to be successful. So it described us as a perfect example of a well-functioning PMO and the way that we've overcome our challenges as being powerful. So that was a really great accolade, and it gave our PMO a big boost to carry on doing the work that we were doing. And that's a picture of our award there on one of Montserrat's beaches. We were also named as one of the top PMO in the Americas during the PMO Global Awards as well. Now, if you haven't heard of Montserrat before, Montserrat is a small pear-shaped island in the Lesser Antilles of the Caribbean. It's about 20 minutes from Antigua, 20 minutes from Guadeloupe, and is an island full of history, as all of these islands are. Very small, but with a very rich history. We're known as the Emerald Island of the Caribbean, and that's because we are both extremely green and luscious, but also that we have a strong connection with Ireland based on our history. The island itself is one of 14 British overseas territories. Now, those territories have a direct relationship with the United Kingdom as part of that colonial history. And now each of the territories has varying relationships with the UK as to how they manage their affairs. Montserrat has its own elected parliament, but it still relies on the UK for a lot of strategic and financial support. It's only 39 square miles in total area, and our population now is less than 5,000 people. So it's a very intense environment, but also it's a small environment that's facing transformational challenges of an almost inordinate scale. And that's what makes my job particularly very interesting. So a little bit about Montserrat. It's a beautiful place, and the Premier of Montserrat always wants me to extend an invitation to anyone I'm speaking to come and visit Montserrat, come and see what we're all about. It has a lot to offer. Beautiful preserved flora and fauna, beautiful hiking trails, really serene environments, and a real getaway from the more commercial islands that you might find elsewhere in the Caribbean. It's also got lovely unspoilt beaches, both black and white sand beaches. Again, a real draw to the local population as well as visitors. That's my youngest daughter in the bottom there, but really pristine. If you're on a Montserrat beach, you're usually the only person on a Montserrat beach. It has that lovely private island feeling, a very, very special place. As I said, it's also got a strong connection with Ireland because of the colonial history. So originally, the island was settled through Irish colonizers who kept slaves on the island, as is the history throughout the Caribbean. And it's now the only island, or the only place outside of Ireland, that celebrates St. Patrick's Day as a national holiday. So it's a very complex history around St. Patrick's Day. It's the day that also celebrates a slave rebellion. So it's very rich, kind of entwined history. But every March 17th, there's 2 weeks of carnival festival spirit, as you can see in these pictures here as well. It's a very popular time for visitors too. And then you may also have heard of Montserrat because of our connection with the Beatles and with George Martin in particular, who came to Montserrat to set up his own recording studio. Now, in the 80s, Montserrat was the place to be for music recording. It brought everyone here from Sting to Elton John to Paul McCartney, Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, you name it. A lot of those great albums of the 1980s were made in Montserrat. And George Martin wanted a place in the Caribbean that was away from everything, away from the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, somewhere that musicians could really focus on the craft of making their music. And so Montserrat became a place for the rich and famous in the 80s to escape from the usual paparazzi, etc. But again, what that showed was Montserrat's, I guess, spirit, but its ability to be a very small place with a very internationally powerful presence as well. And there are a couple of documentaries. If you don't know a lot about Montserrat, there's Under the Volcano, and there's also other documentaries around Montserrat's history and its musical history too. So in 1989, disaster struck the island when Hurricane Hugo landed. A Category 5 hurricane. It essentially stayed over the island for a long period of time. It impacted around 98% of the buildings on the island. It destroyed the nation's electrical grid and the hospital, and it washed away the capital's seaport. It left more than 2,500 homeless, and also many, many more were displaced. And you can see in that image there kind of the level of destruction across a lot of those wooden built buildings across the island. And Montserrat took 5 years to kind of dust itself down, to rebuild, to relook at its infrastructure, to build a new hospital, to build a new port, to rebuild houses, and to get back on its feet. But unfortunately, it wasn't long before double tragedy struck with the eruption of the Soufriere Hills volcano. Now you can see here is a visual of what one of the more significant eruptions looked like, essentially enveloping that cloud the entire island, and was a significant presence from the mid-1990s onwards. And what this volcano did was it essentially wiped out the southern part of the island. The southern part of the island, right beneath that volcano, had stood Plymouth, the capital city. You can see there that the central clock tower in the War Memorial is almost entirely enveloped by the volcanic material. And the blue building that you see there in the foreground in that top picture was a 3-story building. So you can see the level of volcanic material that has built up. And so a huge change to the landscape, a huge change, obviously, for the people of Montserrat, and a huge legacy, a psychological legacy as well to the island. That it provides a bit of context to how our PMO has to operate. And today, actually, the volcano and Plymouth itself, it's the only capital in the world with a population of 0. And it's now become a bit of a tourist attraction. It's like the modern day Pompeii of the Caribbean. You can go and see how people's houses have just literally been left and abandoned. You can walk around the old supermarkets. You can see how life was, how everyone literally had to walk away from their lives in Plymouth and in the south of Montserrat. So that gives you a sense of what this was like. So what does that mean for a talk about PMO? Well, really before 1995, before these crises hit, Montserrat was really on the verge of self-sufficiency. It was a happening place to be. It had a population closer to 15,000 with a great many deal of visitors that came in. It had new infrastructure. A lot of that rebuilding had already taken place. We were a center of offshore banking. Now, whether you think that's a good or a bad thing, we had 90 plus offshore banks. So it started to establish itself as a respected financial sector. It had a medical teaching school. It had vibrant tourism. And it was a place of real regional firsts. It was a place that had the first Caribbean radio station. It was a leader in Caribbean television. And it was a real crucible, as I said, for music recording. But then post-volcanic recovery, even though this is almost 30 years ago that we're talking about, it's a very, very different picture. The country is in majority grant aid funding. That means it needs funding from the UK government to execute its normal affairs, to administer its government services, and to provide what it needs for its people. So it's entirely dependent on outside support for that. It has a population which is less than 5,000 and therefore very limited capacity and human capital. It has a weakened infrastructure, so essentially everyone has had to remove themselves to the north of the island, which was not developed. It was mainly an agricultural area. It was not a place that had ready-made roads and houses for people to go to. And so it's lived in this kind of cycle of building temporary things, and those temporary things have become permanent. That's meant very sluggish economic growth, and with that, low tourism, low export levels and trade, very reduced land capacity. So essentially 2/3 of the island are still in that reduced capacity, and very, very constrained. So a really constrained environment, both in terms of land, people, and resources. So that provides a bit of context. But alongside those challenges, we've got a really exciting portfolio of change that our PMO is working on. $200 million plus of infrastructure and enabling transformational programs and projects that are taking place over a 3 to 5 year period. So after this period of really post-disaster that we're still working through, a lot of great work. We've got a new national hospital project, airport rehabilitation project, subsea fiber optic that was completed in my first year here, school development, road replacement, social housing, geothermal, new parliament building. And then we also have projects that are funded through the EU around renewable energy, tourism development, and a port project, a new port replacement project, which is to really re-establish our new capital in the north of the island in Little Bay. And that's funded by the EU and the UK CIF as well. And then alongside all of that heavy infrastructure work, a lot of institutional reform and development too. So a huge transformation of change. I mean, for any country, these large infrastructure projects are complex. But for a place that's only got 5,000 people, and with all of that history and all of those delivery and governance issues, it's a significant portfolio of work. And our challenges, so when I came to establish the PMO back in 2019, there was a real lack of understanding around what project management, program management really was. And there had also been a real historical failure to deliver. So there's a lack of sponsorship in the past, and also a breakdown of trust because these things have not been delivered. There's also been a collapse of a previous PMO attempt. I didn't realize this until I arrived on the island, but the previous PMO establishment had not worked out for various reasons. So we were coming into that history and needing to rebuild relationships. And then generally, there is a fear of the outsider. I think for any PMO, there's always that resistance. But for Montserrat and all the negative change that's happened to it, it's led to this trauma, this embedded resistance to change, which is a really interesting psychological element to work through and with. We also had to be really clear. We had a lot of ambition. We knew we wanted to do some great things for the island, but also we had to balance that with the capability we had on the island and the capability that we could grow, as well as what we could buy in and what we could mobilize in the Caribbean. Also, because I'm a government PMO, obviously it's a highly politicized stakeholder landscape. And if you can imagine, a new national hospital, new housing, new school, airport, everyone is a stakeholder in all of those projects. So it's essentially like working in a village, but at a national level, so that you have the rumor mill as well associated with that. And before you can give out the truth on a project, there's 10 rumors about what might be happening already out on the road. And also we have to work in a government context. That means we have to work through government elections and transitions and keep those projects on track and on target, as well as working across many, many different ministries and departments. And all of those ministries and departments, like departments in your own organizations, might have different requirements and different levels of maturity. So what are some of the things that we've actually delivered in Montserrat? And this is just to give you a little taste of some of the projects and what we've done. The first project on arrival was a new subsea fiber optic project. And this was really our testing big project. We wanted to demonstrate we could deliver these projects well. Montserrat could self-deliver. And so from everything from the business case to securing the investment to procuring the design, installation, operations for this new cable was achieved. And even though we had to deliver this during COVID, we delivered it ahead of schedule and below budget. So this was an FCDO funded project, locally managed using international partnerships and contracts to demonstrate that we can deliver these types of projects well. And that was a real boost. And I think in any PMO, you've got to try and demonstrate those early wins to build that trust as well. So We didn't want to stop there though, because we had delivered ahead of schedule and under budget. We then wanted to set the vision to be the most fiber-connected island in the Caribbean. So we thought, how can we do this? And one way we thought about this was taking the capability that we had. Project gives you the capability. How can we extend that benefit as quickly as possible? So we created a voucher scheme for all of the customers in Montserrat. If you come and sign up for fiber, you can be rolled out. You can get a guaranteed speed. You have certain protections. Your cost is protected. You will pay the same tomorrow as you're paying today for your old internet connection. And so we worked with the telecommunication providers to deliver that. And that means that we are now the most fiber connected island in the Caribbean. So we've restored Montserrat's last kind of utility. And also we've gone from zero to hero. We've gone from having none to having the most. So some really good demonstration of what we can do using that local resource and local talent. At the other spectrum, we've got our new national hospital project, which is around a £25 million project. And the picture you see there is actually a set of school buildings. And when the volcanic crisis happened, all the operations of the hospital had to quickly move into these school buildings. The school was evacuated and they moved the students to other settings. And this became a temporary hospital. 27 years later, it's still functioning and the staff do an amazing job. But there's been a debate for many, many years about what the new hospital should be like. And the PMO was credited as breaking through that quarter century of debate because we really stood back. And as a PMO, I think sometimes you're brokering between two parties. And we were able to sit down with the funding partners, sit down with the ministers and the local doctors and nurses and work out what were those fundamental functional requirements for a hospital and how can we get this through. So we did that. We developed a business case. We have agreed what are the minimal requirements. We established some new governance around the project and we signed on to design the project. We're now at the very final stages of detailed design. We've started some early construction work as well on the project. So again, a really successful example of an FCDO funded piece of work with lots of specialist input, but locally managed, locally delivered, where Montserrat is leading in the client role and being able to write its own destiny for some of these really key infrastructure projects. So we hope by the end of 2025, a fully equipped brand new hospital enabling new services and better outcomes for Montserrat. And this is a little glimpse of what that facility will look like. We've also had work across our airport. We had a threat that the airport was actually going to be shut down. These are the small little planes that you would come to Montserrat to visit us on, 6 or 7 seaters. A really interesting experience to come in and fly over into Montserrat like a scene from Jurassic Park. And a really, really lovely start to the adventure that is Montserrat. We had an issue in early days here that the runway needed urgently replaced. This was not a project that we had any funding for. It wasn't a project for which a business case exists. And so often in these times of crisis, you kind of kick down those borders, you really collaborate well. And we were able to put together a business case. You're able to kind of forge what the specification for this was, secure that funding. And from procuring this all the way through to getting someone to come and design it, to an oversight specialist, and also the construction. Again, we had to do this during COVID. The airport was the only way in and out of the island at that point. So we had a really narrow window because essentially you had to scrape off the existing runway and relay it with the new tarmac. And we achieved that in a 10-day window. We actually delivered 1 day early and the planes were flying well the next day. And so another key restoration of an important piece of infrastructure with emergency contingency plans in place, again, locally delivered, but with the support of the right specialist help. So again, a real success story. And similarly, we're delivering a new airport control tower, which is in its final stages now too. The port development project is a huge major piece of infrastructure. What you're looking at on the screen there will be our new capital, which is in Little Bay. And again, this will be a seaside investment to attract cargo and cruise vessels and pleasure ships. And really, it's the first step to properly establishing a new capital for Montserrat. This is a project which involves a new 130-meter berthing facility. And again, we've played a key role here in being a check and a challenge. And at one point, we actually paused the project to intervene when we saw that the design itself was not going to be deliverable. So again, that critical friend, that appropriate point of challenge to work things through governance and then get the project back on track. We're now in detailed design and construction phase of that project. And by next year, Montserrat should have a fully functional new port, which is great news for the island and for future development as well. We're also doing some work at the secondary school to upgrade that. And then across other things around governance reform, renewable energy, new solar farms, tourism development and social housing, as I mentioned, as well as working on task forces. I'm sure you all appreciate PMOs often get dragged into all sorts of things. Our PMO gets involved in COVID-19 response, in energy task forces, in that fiber optic task force, as well as new and emerging projects, one of which is a new parliament building, which will be built in Montserrat within the next couple of years as well. Excuse me. So there were some of our achievements, and what I really just wanted to breeze through are some of the lessons that I think we have learned, certainly, from implementing in Montserrat. Now, I fully appreciate Montserrat is a unique context, but I think the challenges that we faced and the lessons that we've learned are applicable to PMOs everywhere. And I talk to PMOs around the world, and all of these seem to resonate with them too. So the first lesson, I think, is how to overcome being the new kid on the block. And I think it's true to say that PMOs are not usually part of any organization's ecosystem. And that's maybe changing. But in the past, a PMO has often been established because there's been some sort of issue with delivering well, where there's been a requirement for greater governance and control. And that means when you come in to establish a new PMO, you're often straddling different authorities, different departments that already exist. You're changing the way that things are done. It often means, as a new part of the organization, there's often not really the appropriate budget behind your PMO to establish itself. And we found that. I've only just got, after 4 years as head of PMO in Montserrat, a really discrete budget for looking at a lot of the development work that we want to do to grow our capability. And that means, I think, because you're a new part of the organization, there are two responses. You can either be adapted and integrated into the organization, or there can be rejection and resistance to what you're trying to do. And I think because of those responses, what we've found is the real need to demonstrate your consistent value as a PMO. What are you bringing to the table? What are you making better? How are you aligning yourself with the organization and the strategy of the organization? And how are you being that organizational friend whilst driving change? I think that's really important when anyone's dealing with change, regardless. How are you still maintaining that organizational friendship while bringing in something new and whilst trying to change or transform? So what we did was we adopted the lingua franca, we adopted the local terminology, the local processes and ways of doing things, and tried to improve them and build on what already existed, rather than a big bang approach of saying everything was needing change. And that's important, especially from an outsider coming into a new environment, with all of the baggage that comes with that. It's important to demonstrate that value and alignment. So lesson one, try all the techniques to overcome being late to the party or the new kid on the block. Our second lesson, and sometimes this is a little bit controversial, is to be strategically inconsistent as a PMO. So I'll dig into this a little bit more. I think we all understand, I'm sure all of us in this group here today know that a PMO can imply many different roles, many different functions. So there can be many different services that our PMOs provide from one organization to the next, and even within the same organization. And that's true. PMOs need to be flexible to the need, the context, maturity, the character of the projects and programs that it supports. And as you know, PMOs can be very controlling, they can be supportive, they can be assuring, they can be reporting and analytical, or they can do a mixture of all of these things. And I think that's very important, that actually sometimes your PMO needs to do a mixture of those things. And so we have established that sometimes our PMO is a rock. There are some red lines There are some requirements, hard requirements that our projects and programs need to follow. But then sometimes we're a little bit more bendable. We're a little bit more like a willow. And if it's a minor project, if it's a low risk activity, then we don't need that to be necessarily a gold-plated process or system. And so because of that, we are strategically inconsistent. We judge our engagement with the organization, with the department, with the ministry, based on the level of risk, the level of maturity, the level of capability, and actually what the people on that team require. And that means in our PMO, we've really focused on ensuring the people that we have within our team actually have emotional intelligence quotas, that they have adaptability and tactical deafness. So yes, it's important to be a good change agent, a good PMO person, but it's also important to have those real soft power skills as well. Our third lesson is really accepting there's no such thing as best practice. And this is a really nice, freeing thing to accept. And I think that we all understand that there's no framework, there's no methodology, no textbook that is fully adaptable or applicable in your organization. And we also find that because we've got this big drift towards automation and towards lots of new certificates and software solutions, that it's actually driven this desire that there is a one-stop shop approach to PMO. And actually that the opposite is the case. Through implementation should be context driven. It's based on the need, the capacity, and the DNA of the organization that you're working for. And so actually differentiation is important. So there's no such thing as best practice, just the right practice for your organization. And that right practice should be co-developed. It should be built together, from the PMO alongside the other elements of the organization that are required to build it. And we even find that even in our macro context, working in the government of Montserrat, there are actually micro pockets of differentiated practice across the organization. And I think to be mature about it, you have to accept that that's going to happen. You have to accept that you cannot just accept every project and every project manager is going to robotically implement the requirements of a PMO. But in fact, it's more important that you're focused on outcomes and the actual benefit rather than the process itself sometimes. So that's our lesson number 3. Number 4, short and long term. Again, this is really just saying that any PMO has to keep its eyes on the near term and the long term. This is like a survival technique, I think, for PMOs. We know the statistics. We know that many PMOs don't survive. And I think this is a key element of it. We've got to demonstrate early and regular wins. We've got to do that to keep the buy-in, keep our relevance, and demonstrate value. But we've also got to keep that longer term impact to the overall portfolio. What are we trying to enable the organization to deliver? Keeping the eyes on legacy, on capability building, and on the strategic ends of what we're doing. So again, build your PMO in those building blocks. Demonstrate that you've got those win-wins early on, and also demonstrate that you're thinking and planting seeds for the future. And so in your team, have people who are both doing that fruit picking, doing that early work, and also who are doing that seed planting for the future. Our lesson number 5, and this is probably the most important, is to turn our projects into relatable human stories. PMOs are sometimes seen as very process-hungry theoretical bodies, tools and templates. But a PMO can also be a really powerful advocate for the human element of change. And so we turn our projects really into stories. What's the human impact? What does it mean to have that new hospital? What does it mean for the person who might come back to Montserrat or who might stay in Montserrat? What does it mean for the nurse who wants to pursue a career here? And that means that you turn the end of your change towards that social impact. And we've adapted our language to suit. We've kept our vocabulary very relatable, very human. Because if you're not delivering human change, then really should you be doing that project in the first place? That's really like a cornerstone to what we do. I do want to leave time for questions. I'm just going to very quickly breeze through these last couple of slides. A really key element to us has been building a sustainable capability. Projects are delivered by people. And in Montserrat, we only have 5,000 people or less. We don't have a strong professional network of project management. And so it was really important that we develop those partnerships. And that picture there is actually our first attempt to establish a partnership in Trinidad with the PMI Institute of the Caribbean. On arrival in Montserrat, we had no standards, there was no consistent way of delivering projects, and the language of change was not understood. Everyone was basically doing their own thing. And there was a really limited perception of what change management or project management could be as a professional pathway. So, engineer, lawyer, teacher, all understood, but project management not accepted as a legitimate way forward for our young people. And again, because we're this small little island in the middle of the Caribbean, we're close to the US, but we're linked to the UK. We've had to adopt a really blended approach. We use all the different standards and we make it right for Montserrat. And we've established those networks. We've developed a new bespoke handbook for how we deliver projects in Montserrat. And we've adopted a champion challenger model and really democratized it. And what that really means is, look, here's the process for risk management. This is what we want you to do. But if you come up with a better process, if you come up with a better tool, a better way of doing something, bring it to the table. And if actually that is better, that becomes the new practice. So you've challenged the model and that becomes the new champion. And that's worked really effectively to encourage kind of internal competition and also self-improvement. And so if you can establish that as part of your tool development, it's really a positive thing. We try and rotate people in the team as well, so even though they might not be our formal members of the team, to try and give that understanding of what a PMO is and how it works, and then to rotate those people back out into the organization. So we have some implicit advocates working out across the team as well. This is just some example of our training work. We do a lot of internal training, again, focusing on scenarios in local context, and they've been very, very well received. Engaging the public, as I said, we've had to be very open and transparent. As a public and government PMO, the hesitancy in the past has been not to share until the projects are almost at the point of delivery. But as a way of countering that negativity, we've tried to have a really proactive, uplifting set of messaging that goes out to the public as well. And that's been really key to getting endorsement, understanding, and countering some of that negativity. And then just some testimonials. This is the Premier of Montserrat, just giving some kind words that we've become a trusted advisor to government, and the impact can be seen across the portfolio of major projects as well. And the previous Premier, he could not have imagined then the national impact this office would have in such a short period of time. It's raised confidence around the world in Montserrat's development journey and has done so in a way that respects Montserrat's unique culture, history, and ambition. And again, we're very, very grateful. It all comes down to the trust, essentially, that the senior leadership, the ministerial team and departments put in the PMO, that we're able to achieve our results as well. So that's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I know I've rattled through a lot of information there. I thank you for having me. I just leave you with those reminders to, as a PMO, to establish your allegiance and value relentlessly. Dare to be strategically inconsistent. Dare to offer different levels of services depending on the context. Don't chase best practice, but pursue good practice. Be a time lord. Think about adding value today and planting those seeds for strategic value and legacy in the future. And turn your projects and programs into human stories, because that is indeed what they are. And PS, do come and visit Montserrat soon. It's been a pleasure for me today. Thank you, Thinker. Thank you, Joe, and the full team for pulling this together. It's a great program, and I'll leave you there. And if we have time for a couple of questions, happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. We are actually, that's what we were chatting about after the conference. We're coming. You took us through a wonderful presentation. I think all of us probably had a lot of feelings, starting with, some very beautiful pictures, and then something very terrible that happened, and then, going back to the amazing project that, big project that you and your team are working on. That's a really big achievement, and probably more to go, but you seem to have a very good handle on things, and there were some great learnings for everybody today. We have 2 questions. I'll just go through one and we'll see. We just have 1 minute and then we have other sessions. So the first question, let me just put it on stage. If we can try to be quick. If not,
Yeah, so I can see that question. Did you ever say no to any initiative because you didn't have the resources, skills available? It's a great question. The main resource constraint we have in Montserrat is money, because we're not able to raise our own capital. So we're grant funded by the UK and other granting agencies. So yes, unfortunately, we do sometimes have to, for a monetary reason, either slow down the pace or not invest when we would necessarily want to. But in terms of resources and skills, we always look at the full package of investing in a project and program. So what do we have to buy in? What do we have to grow? That's always a problem. The human skill is always a huge challenge. The interesting thing about Montserrat, for my context, is there wasn't a lot of choice around these early projects. These were really long overdue, strategically important national projects that had not been delivered to date. So there's kind of no optionality in them. But we also, where the optionality comes in, is what type of hospital do you deliver? And I think you've then got to have something which is deliverable within the funding, but also provides the scope for a project which delivers something like a hospital for Montserrat, which used to have a medical school, which used to be renowned in the Caribbean for its medical work and treatment. And so it's not just take what's there, it's also to build the right size project. And if the funding isn't there, then go and make the case for more funding. But it's a really important question. What we're getting into now is kind of portfolio management, what to pursue and what not to pursue. And for the next capital program, once we've done all this work, that's when we're getting into those really interesting questions. Where do we put that strategic value and emphasis in our investment in the future? So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Martin. This was really, really good. We do have to jump into another session, but we look forward. Please stay for the rest of the conference as you can join the other sessions. And for everybody in the public, we have an open mic where two very brave volunteers are going to take the mic freely. And Mark Burnett is going to be hosting it. So if you don't know how to get there, it's in the lounge area. From the reception, you go to the lounge and then you join the open mic table. It's the first one you'll see. So we'll see you there for the next 15 minutes. Martin, have a wonderful day and good luck with the project. We hope to hear from you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye. See you soon.